So good evening to everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here with you. I cannot tell you how nice it is to feel that you are with our community, knowing and feeling that we've been sort of in a lockdown for such a long time. This is the first of a series of webinars that we have organized on the theme of resilience, hope, and solidarity, a theme that is very prominent currently for each of us as a result of the pandemic, but a theme that has been very recurrent and common for many human rights defenders around the world. This is partly why we decided to sort of name this series of webinars with this theme. We thought it was very appropriate for the occasion. Today, I have three distinguished speakers with me. I feel extremely proud to be able to introduce you to the Kenyan human rights grassroots activists that PBI supports in the slums of Nairobi. We have with us Naomi Barasa, who is a very sort of experienced campaigner that has been working in the field of human rights for over 30 years and used to be a campaigner for Amnesty International in Kenya, and now she's a board member of PBI in Kenya. I want to introduce to Edita Ochieng. She's a feminist, radical feminist, women human rights defender. She does a lot of work on gender violence in the slums of Nairobi, in the slum of Kibera. We'll hear a lot about that. And she's been instrumental in setting up a feminist organization, peace and justice, human sort of feminist organization, and sort of gathering the community of young women defenders in support and against gender and sexual violence against women. Then we have Gacheke with us. Gacheke is also a long-standing activist. He is the coordinator of Mathare Social Justice Center. He's been instrumental in the founding of this a very well-known now movement in Kenya. They started with 1 or 2 social justice centers, and now they have, I believe, over 30 of them across Nairobi and other parts of the country. So I would in a minute, leave them some space for them to tell us more about the situation in Kenya, and in particular, what is the impact that the COVID context is having on people in general, but in particular in the slums, in sort of areas where the levels of poverty are very, very extreme, where, you know, access to water, access to soap, access to health services is not a daily occurrence, yeah? And like perhaps for many of us, the possibility of being in a lockdown at home, you know, having a proper shelter, and that for many people in the slums, it's becoming very challenging because they depend on a daily income. They have to get out of the house to be able to survive, yes? So they are potentially either faced with death, hunger, or, you know, the possibility of COVID sort of threats. So we're going to hear a lot about how COVID is impacting, but also most importantly, how human rights defenders, women and men, are confronting this pandemic and the kind of the risks that they are taking, the actions that they are doing in their communities, because we have to remember that human rights defenders are supporting communities that are already marginalized and unfortunately outside the system, which means that governments are not attending to them, which means that defenders are playing a key worker role in these communities. And that's why it is so important to hear more. What is this role that they are playing? Why do they have to play this role? What are the challenges that they are facing and the risks and so on? So without further delay, I would give the floor to Naomi Barasa. I think it would be really interesting for us to understand better what it's like to live in a slum. She was brought up in a slum, as well as with Czechia and sort of editor, but she's worked across different slums in Nairobi and has been documenting the economic, social, and cultural violations of many communities, has been involved in many campaigns, and it would be really interesting for us to understand what it's like to live and to work in a slum. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Susie. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on board. It's very, very exciting to get an opportunity, and I'm really, really humbled to be to have this opportunity to be speaking to a wide audience, a big audience of varied backgrounds. Let me just briefly give a background, paint a picture on what slums in Nairobi look like. And I'm going to talk about mainly slums in Nairobi. We have also rural slums, but I'll focus mainly on Nairobi. Nairobi has a population of, during the day, 4 million. During the day, 7 million, and at night, 4 million. So 4 million people live in Nairobi. And over 60% of the population lives in slums and informal settlements. These informal settlements and slums are characterized by various manifestation of inequality. Among them, like that stand out so prominently, is inadequate housing, where there are these serious lack of essential services, lack of specifically water and sanitation. And in the event you get water which is mainly privately provided, the water goes as high as 20 times what the rich people pay for that water. So you can imagine the poor pay more, 20 times, based on research. The infrastructure is very poor, no public schools, no public hospitals, and unaffordable services. I've given an example of water. There is low literacy levels, mainly below 41% in the slums. There is very high levels of unemployment at 80% and above. There's high insecurity, mainly from law enforcement officers. You hear about police brutality, extrajudicial execution, and Gasheke is going to paint a clearer picture. We got very high mortality rates, especially for children and pregnant women. Survival in the slums is dependent on a hand-to-mouth economy. So people work for them to be able to earn that day and eat that day. It's obviously very overcrowded. Mathare, approximately 450,000 people. Kibera, between 800,000 and 1 million people. And in Korogosho, where I come from, we have 500,000 people. In these communities, you hardly see the presence of government when it comes to essential service provision. And so the link between essential services and the people living in the slum will in most cases be faith-based institutions and human rights defenders. And so when you look at the COVID situation, this is a population that has been made double vulnerable or even triple vulnerable, because they're already very vulnerable as a result of poverty and the inequality that is manifested. And then they get another vulnerability due to this COVID-19 crisis. Not to say that women experience triple vulnerability, women and children, because of their status in society, especially with distribution of resources and control of resources. When we look at the World Health Organization guidelines and Kenya regulations as far as COVID is concerned, you realize that there's overemphasis on sanitizing and washing of hands. How do people wash hands in an environment where water is super expensive? Commodities are very expensive. Things are very unaffordable. Not to say that within the last 3 months, between February and now, Nairobi has not had water, let alone the slums. Nairobi, even in affluent places, have issues with water. So the little that they will receive will definitely not go to the slums. When we talk about social distancing, how do you social distance in an environment that is less than 10 hectares and has 500,000 people? How do you social distance in a house that is 10 by 10 fixed, and that house has 7 household people? If we were to go by UN Habitat standards, which is 5 people in a household, and you have to social distance in a 10 by 10 house, you can imagine what that means to people in the slum. When you talk about quarantine, these are people who depend on hand-to-mouth economy. You're simply telling them, isolate, quarantine, and die of famine, because then they are not able to produce, they are not able to eat. And then we talk about masks. People who live in the slums do manual jobs. They go and wash people's clothes. They do very, very manual jobs that pay them at most 500 Kenya shillings, which is like $5. The best will pay that. There are people who will earn $50 in that day. So are they going to prioritize a mask that is worth $50, or will they prioritize food? And then we talk about curfews. These are people who walk to work, a lot of them, because if you're earning $2, $3, you're not going to use transport where you're going to pay and spend all your money. So you think, let me walk back home and to work so that I can take this money back to my family so that I can be able to feed them. So when we look at all these things, you realize that there is no clear provision taking care of people who are more vulnerable and therefore more susceptible to COVID-19. Then when you look at women, decision making, the access to resources is very, very, very negligible. So when it comes to the issue of COVID-19, women are not going to be the first in terms of advantage, yet they are the caregivers. So they are more vulnerable because they are caregivers. They will be, in most cases, at the front line. They are frontline people in caregiving, yet they are not capacitated resource-wise. They're not capacitated education-wise. They're less educated. They're not capacitated in terms of decision-making. So you realize it makes them triple vulnerable. And then when you look at the kind of challenges people will go through, and it has a bigger impact on women, access to appropriate information. There's so much rumor mongering around COVID-19. The state has not been able to provide a proper strategy to provide appropriate and factual information that will enable people to make informed decisions. It is worse in remote areas where they do not have electronics, because the most that the state has been using are televisions. The people who do not have access to electricity, they cannot afford television. The other thing is high cost of commodities, including food and soap, and water. So people are starving. Last week, 2 weeks ago, in the national television, there was this woman who has 6 kids, whose kids had gone hungry for 5 days. She ended up boiling stones for children, hoping that these children would gain that hope that mommy is cooking something and fall asleep in the process. So that's the kind of situation people are exposed to. Of course, the cost of transportation is so inhibiting at the moment, and people will not be able to travel to access services, to access hospitals, to access food, let alone that the mode of transport that a lot of slum people use does not guarantee safety, because people use motorbikes, they use riders. So you sit on a motorbike, there's no 1.5 meter distance for you to guarantee security. Of course, there's also mass job losses. This has affected mainly the poor. By last week on Wednesday, Kenya had lost low-income jobs at 1.2 million people. That was the figure, and was being projected by the end of this week, it will have skyrocketed to 3 million. These are poor people. They're the ones who lack insurance. They're the ones who don't have social services. We don't have the social services in Kenya that provides food stuff and stuff. Then, of course, there's very high escalation of SGBV, so sexual and gender-based violence, especially among women and children in the slum. Of course, it's compounded by all the other things that I talked about and inequality. And so when you look at the role of human rights defenders who are also living in the slums and so also affected by this very environment I'm talking about, they have a double responsibility to make sure that people are taken care of and to make sure that they are safe from COVID and from police brutality. But also, at the same time, they do not have food because they are also among the people who depend on hand-to-mouth economy. So it's really complicated. The problem, the COVID-19 is so compounded by many things. And that, of course, I have not mentioned, which is a key issue, psychosocial support. These human rights defenders are frontliners in this crisis, but nobody takes care of them. The government has not provided a clear strategy and plan on how psychosocial support will be offered and who will access it. So they are frontliners. People expect them to perform, yet they're not necessarily accessing some of these things. They go home to a hungry family after spending the entire day in the community, supporting their communities. I want to stop there so that I can allow my comrades to take over. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for painting such a challenging picture of the situation in Nairobi and in Kenya, in the slums and informal settlements, which is the same sort of term that is used indistinguishably. I would like now to hear a bit more from Editor, who has also been doing quite a lot of work in support of women, particularly those impacted by sexual violence, but because our understanding is that this COVID context is actually posing huge risks for women. The levels of violence against them have increased. Can you please tell us a bit more about what is happening and what you and your feminist colleagues are doing to support those women that are at risk at the moment in the slums? Thank you.
First of all, Susie, thank you for this platform. And I'm really happy to be here just to share my small opinion on what is going on the ground. And at the same time, also, I want to thank the participants to join us for this meeting tonight, just to ensure that we are also making the world to look different. My name is Editor Adhiambo Chieng. I was very privileged to be born in Kibera. I grew up in Kibera and I was bred in Kibera. Right now, I'm turning 32 on Sunday. It's going to be my birthday, and I'm really looking forward for that day because we're waiting for our president to cut the measures like locking down the country and imposing the curfew to us on 6th June. So maybe on 7th June is going to be a big day for me. So being in the field for almost 10 years, it has been so amazing because every day we manage to get different results, and they're very positive results. And during COVID right now, it has been so difficult for everyone in the world. Everyone is suffering. But when you come in Kibera, where I am born and where I'm staying right now, it is even worse for women because, as Naomi said, and I want to affirm everything that Naomi said because that is the truth of the matter, but sometimes we are not given even chance to speak the reality of where we come from. It is not that Naomi is profiling the informal settlements. And again, somebody here asked about the difference between slums and informal settlement. And I want to say it is the same because informal settlement is a terminology that is politicized. It is political, but the reality, it is the same. It is political because they want to deny us access to health. They want to deny us access to water. But the only thing that they take to us after every 5 years is our votes. So our vote has been formal for after every 5 years. So just working with women, and right now working in a door-to-door based, and we've really managed to meet more than 5,000 households. What we do right now, we deliver food, and when we go to deliver food, we don't only deliver food and leave our women like that. We speak with women on the ground, and what we found out is that so many women are sexually violated, and the people who are violating women are their closest relatives. These women cannot come out and just shout and even report because there is so much impediment. For the last 2 weeks, the young people who were killed, they were mob injustice. And these young kids, 14 years old, the youngest was 14 years old, they've been stealing from people, and they even stabbed a broadcaster to death. But what they've been doing to women, when I was speaking to these women, they were telling me, I'm 54 years old and he raped me. How will I tell the world that a 14-year-old boy raped me as an older woman? And it was really difficult for them just to come out. And for us, we've been looking at a resilient society. We've been having hope for this society. We want to create women who are powerful in terms of saying no to retrogressive cultures, because these retrogressive cultures affect us every minute. These retrogressive cultures, at the end of the day, they lead to rape, at the end of the day, they lead to poverty. So it means women don't develop in slums because of imposed cultures to them. So for us right now, and Naomi have really talked about mental health. We didn't grow up knowing about mental health because we were perceived also as women to remain strong, and at the same time you submit. Those are two different things. You need to show the world that you are strong, but when you are in my house, you need to submit because you are a wife, because you are a girl, because you are a daughter, and so many things. So with the COVID has really affected so much. It has double affected women in the slums. Women are abused, gender-based violence is high, and from women to children, it's also affecting children because we are also giving out books. We made our library portable, and when we are distributing our books, there's this one child who was sharing, and she was telling me, I cannot read my books. And I was like, why can't you read my books? Why can't you read your books at home? And he was telling me, every day my father beats my mother up, so I don't have a safe space just to read my books. That's why I'm staying outside here. So when they finish fighting, I'll go back at home. So the reality is on the ground that sexual violence should be announced as a national disaster in Kenya. But being that we are really controlled by a patriarchal system and people don't understand the pain of being a survivor, it is really difficult to come outside and say, I am a survivor. Personally, being a survivor, and everywhere I go, I love to share my story to ensure that women can have a space to speak their stories. I was defiled when I was 6 years old, and I was gang raped when I was 16 years old. And with all those two things, it came out with a very painful experience. And it came out with a lot of resistance from my side because I had to, because later on I was also pregnant, and having a child out of rape was so difficult for me as a young girl, 16 years old. I was doing my final exam. It was really difficult for me even to share to my. I realized we were giving perpetrators the power. Speaking, we realized that we were sharing perpetrators, and this was the end in Kisumundogo. We said we need to come out and stop this because already at 21 years old, I was a young mother and I was looking at my child and she was not safe in that environment. So we had to come out so strongly. We had to build a strong and a sustainable synergy that is existing up to date to condemn sexual and gender-based violence. Because if you don't speak matters about sexuality, if you don't speak about everything in African society starts with sex. They don't care whether you agree, whether you consent or no. Because you are a girl, you can sleep according to men, according to retrogressive men and toxic masculinity. They believe you are a woman, anyone can sleep with you. And we had to stop that. And right now, we are stopping sexual and gender-based violence. And we are calling upon the world just to come in solidarity with us and help our president announce sexual and gender-based violence a national disaster. It is not an easy thing to speak about it. It's not an easy thing to heal and transform and be so strong. Thank you so much, Susanna, for giving me this opportunity to share.
Well, Edita, I have to say, I mean, I was very privileged to visit Kenya in February and to spend time with you and your feminist fellow kind of women, and it was really, really inspiring, you know, going to the refuge where you are hosting women that have been sexually abused. All the work that you are doing in the slums is really, really important and impressive, and yeah, it's very inspiring, and thank you so much for sharing those difficult stories, because as you say, you know, it's not an easy thing, but it's very important to support other women that are facing, you know, similar circumstances. So thank you for that. Now we're gonna give the floor to Gacheke. Gacheke, he perhaps can tell us a bit more about the social justice centers and all the work that this movement is doing around the country, and some of the issues that are being faced by the communities, police abuse, which is now a theme, you know, around the world, unfortunately, but it has been a theme for a long time in Kenya as well. So perhaps, Gacheke, can you please tell us a bit more about your work? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie. I hope you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, greetings to our audience. Thank you very much for having this webinar of resilience, hope, and solidarity. My name is Geshehe. I'm a coordinator of Madara Social Justice Center. We really appreciate very greatly this platform because it's part of help to amplify our struggles from the grassroots movement. As Susie, she has said, we are involved in community organizing and monitoring human rights violations, documenting, as my colleague Naomi and Edita, they have shared about the horrible situation of the human rights violation in Kenya. So we started Madara Social Justice Center to 2015, and this was a struggle to try and locate the struggle of the human rights movement in the grassroots. I'm very happy that PBI was involved with us in the formative stages, and we had a mini meeting together where they did a accompaniment of the human rights defender in the grassroots. And that is the journey that we started with the One Community Justice Center in Mathare. And then from there, they have grown to 16 social justice center and 14 countrywide. And even Kibera Feminist for Peace and Justice, part of our network of social justice center. And this is to try and continue defending human rights in the grassroots, building the democracy, and a campaign for social justice. As the webinar framed that resilience of hope and solidarity is our struggle to try to rescue a failed democratic transition in Kenya. And Naomi has shared a very historical background of our history of human rights violations. COVID-19 crisis came when we still had a greater problem. We didn't have unemployment. We had a huge problem of police brutality. Our police is not reformed. It has been having a historical problem with human rights violation, gross human rights violation. So in March, when first cases of COVID was announced in Kenya, there was a big challenge because the government in charge, the only thing they had was a police service to ask people to have a lockdown. And you know, crisis of having no food, no water, as Naomi has shared, water and sanitation is a major crisis in informal settlement. The entire economy is in informal economy of hands to mouth. So you are telling people who are poor, who live from hands to mouth, to stay indoor. That was a major challenge because many people they are involved in informal economy during the night and during the day. So when you tell people to remain indoor during the night, so you're telling them to starve. And the same government has not provided them with the basic needs like water. Healthcare institutions has collapsed. And then you have big problem of infrastructure. So, and then from there, then there was a curfew starting from the March. And now it's going almost 3 months with this curfew. So from there, they use the police to start locking people down in houses and asking people to remain in. This has a major widespread human rights violation of police brutality. We have documented number of cases of almost 18 people who have been killed by police. And this is through police shooting, beatings, detention, and extortion, widespread, and it has been reported widely. So the social justice centers have been involved in documenting these cases and working also together with the Office of Human Rights Commission here in Nairobi. We have issued a number of reports showing how these gross human rights violation has been widespread across the country. So this is a situation that have caught us during this COVID-19 crisis. And this is a major crisis because when you don't have healthcare infrastructure, it's very difficult to say that you'll be able to provide people with healthcare, especially when this COVID-19 demand and a healthcare system that is very important. Our healthcare is already, there was no healthcare when even COVID-19 came. So it has been very difficult to do testing, treatment. So you find the majority of people have been locked up in the quarantine centers and they're not getting treatment or being tested. So there's been a major crisis of this COVID-19. And that's the work that human rights organizations have been doing, especially social justice centers. And we have documented and also campaigned against this police brutality, reported these cases, and made sure that we have continued to campaign against the violations.
Great, thank you, Gateke. And I mean, obviously, some of the problems and the challenges that you are facing in the slums at the moment are structural problems, are not new to the pandemic. But I guess the pandemic has exacerbated many of those problems and has exposed them even more clearly. And then, of course, there are specific and very, very unique problems related to the pandemic as well. So you could also, when sort of speaking, make that differentiation, because some people from the audience are sort of asking. I would like to move on and ask Naomi. I know that they have been working on a campaign. Well, it's initial stages, but I believe Naomi and a group of grassroots toolkit organizers that Editor is also part of, I think they've done quite a lot of work in terms of understanding the issues of sexual violence against women, and they have done loads of consultations with community members. And I understand that they are sort of planning and intending to launch a campaign on this topic. So perhaps you can tell us a bit more about all these important initiatives that you are taking, because I know it's easy to focus on the problems, but we don't want just to see that, because we know that you all are doing very, very important work and you know, at a lot of sort of risk and using all your resilience. So perhaps now you can tell us a bit about that.
Thank you, Susie, for that question. I just want to start by acknowledging Griffins. They like my earrings. We will find a way of getting such to you if it's possible. And thank you, Susie, for that question. Griffin has also asked if there are threats to human rights defenders, especially during this COVID-19 situation. So is it okay if I answer both your question and Griffin's?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, okay. So I'll start with yours. The situation, even though it sounds very, very difficult, there's very high resilience, super high resilience among human rights defenders, especially from the slums. A lot of people from the middle class are locked up in their homes because they have the luxury of doing online transaction, from money transaction to purchases of commodities. People in the slum do not have that luxury. So one way or the other, they have to come out, go sell something, go buy something, go assist so and so. And especially like in this COVID-19 situation where SGBV has escalated, people have to rescue. A child has been violated, either gender-based or defiled. That child has to be rescued. A woman or a man has been raped or other sexual assaults, they have to be rescued. Who will do this? It's not the usual people who work in these high-end offices. It will be people in the same communities, in the same slums, their neighbors, their friends. And these neighbors will call the human rights defenders within, because those are their first points of linkage to essential services. So they are out there, human rights defenders. So number one, it is super resilience, because the crisis itself does, and the situation that we've described does not guarantee you safety from infection. But secondly, you have to grapple with my family and food and this emergency. So for me, I can only describe it as high resilience. And while communities appreciate a lot what the role that human rights defenders play, it is not very, very materially rewarding to the human rights defenders because they are volunteers. All of them are volunteers. Editor here is a volunteer. Gasheke is a volunteer. I mean, all these people are volunteers. Yeah. The work I'm doing with the team of women human rights defenders, editor and team, I volunteer full time. I mean, so if you want to look at the reward materially, then you might get disappointed. But when you look at the reward from a fulfillment point of view and changing, meaningful change in the lives of people, then it's great. So I see super resilience, I see a lot of hope, and I see a torch, a candle lit by human rights defenders in a lot of these slums. Because if you came in as a stranger, especially from the north, you'd probably even be scared to make like a kilometer into that community because the conditions are so deplorable. So I think there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of fulfillment, there's a lot of resilience. I also want to talk about threats. Recently, like 3 weeks ago, the government flattened, forcibly evicted a community in the slum near Mathare, between Mathare and Korogosho. It's called Kariobangi. The government proposed that this community occupied land that was meant for a sewage plant. But this community has lived there as long as I can remember. I am now 47. I started seeing this community there when I was 10 years old. I don't know if that's when they settled there, but that's when my imagination sends me back to. So they have title deeds, which is the highest indicator of ownership, legal ownership of land. The bulldozers came. It was rainy because it's been raining heavily in Kenya. They flattened homes for over 5,000 families and they left them out in the open. No food, no space for social distancing now because they have to crowd together to create some warmth over themselves. Children being covered with polythene paper. So one human rights defender who, Susie, you probably have met, her name is Ruth Mombi. I mean, she was on a global tour in the UK, speaker tour. She went to document the violation, and so she started reporting using social media. She started getting threats from very senior police officers, and they said, if you do not stop sharing the information you're sharing around this community, we will enforce disappear you. So those are the kind of threats people get. And during this COVID-19 situation, mobilizing for support is very difficult because people are locked up, either because of the lockdown, the government lockdown, or people are self-isolating because of safety measures. So you are being threatened, but it's very difficult to mobilize people for support. You are being threatened, but you cannot go to anyone's house and hide there and like an evacuation plan. You are being threatened, but you do not have money to escape. And even if you had money to escape, you can't go very far because lockdowns, I mean, there are roadblocks everywhere. We are on lockdown. And then at the same time, you can't evacuate yourself. She has 2 kids. So if she is to run away for safety, who does she leave her kids with? Where does she leave her kids? She does not have a big stock of food for, you know, like for eventualities. So those are kind of situations women are living with. Of course, because of frustration by men, inability to provide for their families, domestic violence has escalated. So if you are a female human rights defender who spends their day in the community volunteering, and you go back to a home empty-handed, to a home with a man whose ability to provide has been curtailed, then you know what that means as far as domestic violence is concerned. And the police are not interested in your cases. I mean, they are busy dealing with curfew and people who disregard curfew. So they are busy killing and busy beating up people and manning lockdowns. If you are gender-based violated, you go to hospitals. Hospitals they are overwhelmed with COVID cases and others, but even fear. People are not going to hospital. it's that kind of picture that human rights defenders are operating in, that kind of environment.
Great. Thank you so much, Naomi. I was wondering if perhaps Editor could give us a sense of how they feel that perhaps the international community, their human rights organizations or other sort of solidarity networks could maybe support you and sort of, enhance your efforts given all the challenges that you are facing.
Thank you so much, Susanna, for that wonderful question. And before I go to my answer direct, I want to talk about somebody has asked about if we have advocacy, and we take people to court and for psychosocial support. And for us, this has been our strategy, and we are trying also to modify our strategy depending on the situation. And with COVID, things are different. Whereby even like what Naomi has said, human rights defenders are being threatened by senior people in the community. And as a human being, sometimes you fear and you compromise to the situation at times. So we advocate every day for new changes, and we also push our recommendation into the parliament, meeting the policymakers to ensure that we have modified, friendly, and updated policies that can defend women, especially on matters of sexual rights. And also, with us, we've been taking people to court. Every day we're in courts for solidarity. Every day, Kibera Law Court, because that is where our cases are going. We don't care if it is a woman or it's a child or anyone. As long as it's somebody who has been sexually violated, we go to court to give out solidarity. And for the psychosocial support, I cannot say we are mental health practitioners, but we're just helping ourselves. We have a group and we call ourselves Survivors Dialogue. So in the Survivors Dialogue, we sit, we share our stories, and we bring new members in, and we build resilience, hope, and also we look at the available opportunities outside there, and we link women. But at the same time, we don't leave women as just survivors. We transform women to be activists. We transform women to be more powerful, to get out and battle against sexual and gender-based violence. We transform women to speak so loudly. We transform women to scream when they see any sexual offense. So in our small circle, we are not mental health practitioners, because personally, I don't know how I'm like this, but I did not go to any mental health practitioner. I just decided, let me pick the pieces of my life and fight back, because I knew the perpetrator was taking advantage and the perpetrator was becoming so much powerful. So we also have a rescue center. It is not a safe house, because when we are speaking about all these dangers, and Naomi really put it so well on how we live in informal settlement. Let me tell you, informal settlements are not safe for anyone. They're not safe for anyone. So if we put our safe house in informal settlement, it is so difficult, because perpetrators can attack you. We are only young women, and we are 15 of us. Sometimes it's so difficult. So in our rescue center, we give women, girls, and boys who have been sodomized time for only 48 hours. After 48 hours, we are done with you, because we are looking at our capability, and we are looking at the resources that we have. And Susan, you are there and you saw it. And it's a really temporary structure, and that is what we can offer right now. Just giving you a room to relax. We take you for medical, and we refer you. We go to the police station, we help you to report, and then we are like, we need to take you out of Kibera, because some of perpetrators are so powerful than the government. 2 years ago, I was really threatened, so much threatened, up to my doorstep. And it was really horrible. I was really terrified, because I've never experienced that. It was my first experience, and I had to be silent. I had to withdraw, because my children were there, they are girls, and these perpetrators were threatening me using their phones, sending me text messages, coming to my house during the night when I come from other things, and just getting them on our gate, and they'll you are gonna kill you because you are a noisemaker in this community. So yes, we need support, and solidarity has been the main thing in the movement. And also we need to shift our solidarity methodology. If young women in Kibera, especially women human rights defender, can get different trainings that can empower them, it can help us also to, sometimes we confront, but in a very active and violent way. They can get amicable solution when they're really empowered and they have this information, and they're increasing their networks, because there is also learning through exchange program. Susanna, you came, and when you came, it was really amazing, because there was no, I've been sexually violated. Believe me, that is the world I want. I want when girls are 5 years and they're 40 and they're 90 and they're 120, they say, I've never been sexually violated. We need to shift our approaches so that we can get new stories. We are really tired of the same old stories, men taking advantage of girls with so much excuses, like what was she wearing, justifying things in the community just to oppress women. So if the international space is there, international community, and we can partner together. We have opportunity and a chance to partner together, learn from you, get new case study, do different things on the ground. Because right now I'm trying to build software, which is really difficult because I'm not an IT person. So I'm really taking a lot of time, and we are really taking a lot of efforts because all of us, we are not IT experts. So we want to put this application on our phones, and this software is going to help women in Kibera to know where is the safe space and where is not safe for them. And it's going to change depending on the time, depending on what they're doing, and just having different women on the field together. And at the same time, we want to shift it on an economical perspective, because also we want to rescue women and we want to give women information through this software. And on the software, we are not going to use English alone. We are going to use our vernacular language, because that is what we understand most. That is what women can read here in Kibera, to tell them this is the information and this is where what you can do. We want to make our software application a one-stop shop for women, where if you can read Spanish, you just go there, you read Spanish, and you get help from a psychosocial support, doctor, a policewoman. I said a policewoman intentionally, because even policemen has been taking advantage of women who are sexually abused on how they respond to questions. So we need also to identify the friendly police to come and work with us so that they can help us beat this epidemic. Sexual and gender-based violence is a pandemic that for the longest time people don't speak about. And it has come during COVID, and we can see it. Every woman is afraid because you don't know who will take advantage of you. Is it your neighbor? Is it your father? Is it your brother? Every woman is afraid right now, especially in Africa, because it's a pandemic that people don't want to speak about. It is a pandemic that some people take it like a joke. It is a pandemic more than, I don't want to compare sexual and gender-based violence with COVID. This is a pandemic. And if the world cannot sort it today, and I believe that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Because when perpetrators grow, they shift, they migrate, they met new people. In Kibera, people are not speaking about sodomy because it's a topic that people thought it was only girls. But now boys are being sodomized. At the same time, also, men don't want to take their responsibility and ensure that community is growing through mentorship, and we are having men role model in our community. So we need to push our policies, plus just looking at international policies and the ratified policies that Kenya have. Our constitution 2010 is a very beautiful constitution with so much laws and very beautiful. But the problem is lack of enforcing these laws. Where I come from, laws are not enforced because we are informal settlement. which has been politicized. We are criminals already in the slums. They look at you as a crime, as a criminal, because you are brought in the slum. And every day I say, it was a privilege for my mother to give me birth to me in the slum, because I'm ending so much oppression today. We are moving and we are there and will exist more than 100 years just to protect women and girls. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, Evita. That's very inspiring. Certainly, I felt very empowered when I went to you and your female feminist women, and I could see so much respect, people in the community have for you, men and women. In fact, I was surprised to see, that everyone was looking at you with so much dignity. So clearly, you have achieved a lot, with your female sort of colleagues, and I hope we continue supporting you and other grassroots defenders in this regard. We only have 10 more minutes to go. So I would just like to ask Gacheke, because obviously we know, because PBI has been working with social justice and with grassroots kid organizers in the slums for a number of years, and we know all the important work that you're documenting cases, you're trying to sort of find evidence, you're trying to bring perpetrators to become more accountable. You also invited PBI UK and also the Alliance for Lawyers at Risk, a pro bono network that supports human rights defenders, to travel to Kenya in February. And we were able to meet with many of you. Also, the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings was invited on an academic visit at the request of PBI and Social Justice Center. So I think it's important for people in the audience to understand that despite all these challenges and all these difficulties, you are also doing incredibly smart and very, very sophisticated work. And I want that to be sort of seen and almost touched by the audience in as much as possible. So perhaps, Cheke, if you don't mind just telling us a little bit more of what the social justice have been doing to document all those extrajudicial killings that have been happening for quite some time. And of course, during this pandemic context, things have been exacerbated.
Yeah. Susie, as you have said, that's very great that you visited Nairobi with the team of Alliance of Lawyers from UK, the Special Rapporteur of extrajudicial killing, Agnes Karaman, and we really appreciated. We had a program together with the Peace Brigade International and Ghetto Foundation, which is a community-based organization here in Kenya, and Madara Social Justice Center, a program that was funded by European Union that lasted for almost 2 years, which had a major impact, because also it helped us to create more grassroots voices, community human rights defenders that went to form different communities, social justice center like Dandora community justice. What is important is that the situation, although it is difficult, moving up, and that's why we have formed the social justice center work group. That is a collective voice of a different social justice center in informal settlement, and they are doing very, very great. Dozens of the cases now they are submitted to independent police oversight, and some cases also are getting justice. This is only because they are in every community. There is a group of human rights defenders, whether it's in Kibera, whether it's Kayole, whether it's Madare,
We lost you, Gacheke? Yeah? I think we've lost Gacheke, right?
Sorry, yes. Good. So whether it's in this informal settlement, they are organized community justice center. So I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I think not very clearly.
Hello.
Maybe, yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, a little
Now,
bit. Okay. Yes. Yes.
So thank you very much. And the question there was asked by
I think Acheke, we cannot hear you well.
Kathleen about how we are working together, like Kariobangi, where there was people who are evicted. Yes, we have a Kariobangi Social Justice Center that has been documenting those violations. Susie, am I there now?
We can and cannot. So yes,
You can hear
now
me?
it's a good place. Yeah. Perhaps because the Acheke, because we are sort of we only have 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if I can, because there are some questions from the audience, and I think it would be nice at least to respond to some of them quite quickly, just to make sure that they get sort of some information from you. So some people are asking, you know, the UN, it's kind of recognizing the right to human rights, water, sanitation. How do you think that sort of right, that those rights could be fulfilled? I mean, is there any way that we can help, you know, to sort of ensure that that UN sort of mandate is implemented in Nairobi? So that would be one of the questions. And then another question, you've been talking about faith-based groups and community groups. If you want to expand a bit on whether they are a source of support in the community or not. And then perhaps if there has been any effective interventions from foreign organizations that are actually helping, you know, human rights defenders in Kenya. So because we have very little time and I want the audience to be able to sort of hear from you, let's have a minute and just address any of those topics. You know, you are free to choose. Yeah, shall we do that?
Yes, thank you very much, Susie. Recently, we have issued a report of monitoring report between Social Justice Center Working Group and UN Human Rights Office here in Nairobi, who we have been working very closely. And we recommended that the government needed to provide clean water and sanitation in the form of settlement. And the government also has responded. Recently, they say they will be cleaning up the sewage system, providing water and clearing the garbage. But this is we're still waiting. So there is a lot of pressure that is coming from the UN Human Rights Office, and especially the work that we have done by showing that there is a very chronic shortage of clean water in the informal settlement. So that is being responded, but what we need is to put more pressure and solidarity to make sure that the resources that the government is given by World Bank and IMF, they are used to provide people with the basic needs like water and healthcare. That's what we have done very well through the campaign. The other issue is about how we are working together with other community organizations. That the question was asked there. Yes, we are collaborating together and building our campaigns together to make sure that our voices is heard by the government and making sure that the government is accountable on the human rights violation that has been reported with the government relevant agencies. Yes, we have received a lot of support from the international organization, starting with the PBI, Amnesty International, and many other organizations. So what we need is to collaborate and work together and increase more resources to the grassroots human rights defender, and especially what Edita has talked about, especially section gender-based violence, providing a grassroots human rights defender with the resources and solidarity to make sure they are able to gender-based violence. That would be very critical to put resources in the grassroots.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Acheke. We could hear you well. Any other reactions from Edita or Naomi before we wrap up?
Maybe I just add some information on the same. I thought there are 3 questions that are related here, 2 of those that you've asked and another one. Someone asked, what is the solidarity that can be offered in the context of lockdown? And And Guy Berinja asked effective intervention by foreign organization to HRDs. And I would break this into two phases. Phase one during COVID crisis, and phase two in a normal. I hope we'll not have a totally new normal, and so that we'll have a new normal with some old experiences. But in this current COVID situation, psychosocial support is very critical. Increasing resources towards social psycho support for the HRDs, increasing resources for food for HRDs that are working in these communities, and increasing resources that go to litigation, especially. For example, if we need to go to court urgently because something has cropped up and it's under certificate of urgency, we will not have resources because the situation is very, very dire. In long-term intervention, I would look at psychosocial support and the whole question of wellness for HRD as very critical. I would look at litigation and mass mobilization for advocacy, especially by people out of Nairobi, out of Kenya. Just supporting the HRDs in their own issue in mass mobilization during advocacy is very critical. Law enforcement being made more accountable and responsive, especially to the needs of the vulnerable people, especially during this COVID. Gasheke has talked broadly about documenting and reporting, and just helping HRDs and human rights organizations and CBOs to expose human rights violation widely and holding enforcement mechanism response accountable. So exposure and enabling this documented information to go out there and supporting advocacy is very critical. Of course, Njoroge asks, why haven't I talked about CBOs? I talked about HRDs. The only thing I didn't say is that a lot of these human rights defenders are organized within CBOs, like Gashekes is a CBO, like Editors is a CBO. So I just didn't mention, but of course, yes, CBOs are doing a critical job on the ground. Maybe it's important to also say the government is doing something during this COVID period, but what the efforts they are making are super submerged, and a lot of the most vulnerable of the poor are not reachable easily within the government systems and structures. So it is the CBOs, the churches, faith-based organizations, and human rights defenders who are literally accessing such people. So the government is doing something, but it's not enough. Again, it is not so well monitored and held to account. We hear how much money IMF has given Kenya. We hear how much money World Health Organization and World Bank has given Kenya, but we never get to hear how much of that has gone to the slums, for what reason, for water and sanitation, for food and, and health support. So again, very critical that this is monitored so that Kenya can be accountable to all the resources they are receiving for purposes of COVID-19. Thank you.
Okay, great. Editor, do you want to give one final short comment before we just wrap up, please?
Yeah, as I finish, Katarina, we also use local communication like radios, like local television, just to talk and have a radio or TV, a real talk show on all these matters. And also just to remind our panelists and attendees that pandemic is not only any emergency that is killing people in the world. Pandemic is what the system is doing to women right now, killing women, and they're walking dead. Kindly support women empowerment. It is not a competition, so that we can deal with sexual and gender-based violence as an epidemic of the world. We need to sort this. Women need to be free everywhere in the world. So let us bring our hands together. Let us partner. Let us use the small resources that we have to ensure the story doesn't repeat itself. I'm really privileged. Thank you so much, Susanna. I don't have much to say right now. Asante.
Asante. Well, thank you so much to all the speakers. It's been incredibly inspiring. I mean, I so much enjoy, meeting you, listening into your stories and learning, you know, from all the expertise and experience you have. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. Thank you to the audience. I think there were like 100 people in the audience or 120 people. I lost count. We were oversubscribed. So I feel very proud of being associated with you, and I hope we can continue supporting you in the best way we can, always listening to your needs and always trying to respond to the specific ways in which you think you can be best supported. That's the way in which PBI helps. So yes, thank you very much, and I hope you join our future webinars. We have 5 more on different topics. The next one is next Wednesday, and we'll be focused on the context in Latin America, the impact of COVID, and again, how it's impacting on rule of law issues and other human rights kind of situations. So yes, thank you so much. Big hug to my comrades in Kenya, and yeah, let's be in touch and together and united. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susie, and everyone else for allowing us to share our experiences.
Thank you very much. So inspiring to all. Bye bye.